Well, hello everyone. Wanted to put together this lecture here on therapies or continue with it. If you have not already seen the lecture on uh, the introductory lecture on therapies, as well as the lecture on group therapies and humanistic therapies, you might want to watch those first prior to watching this one, just because sometimes they blend into one another. They lead into the next. Now I want to turn around and talk about what are called behavioral and cognitive therapies. First of all, what do I mean by a behavioral therapy? Okay. If you watch the previous video lectures, you probably heard me mention the idea that the prior ones are what such as humanistic and group and the Freudian approach are insight-based therapies. The goal there is to give you an insight into what's going on through the group process or by getting into the unconscious and so on. With behavior-based therapies, the focus is on changing the behavior, okay, whatever the behavior may be. You don't always concern yourself with the cause. And sometimes it doesn't really matter what the cause is. And that's part of the issue here. Okay. So I use this example sort of as a joke as how a behavior therapist who is an auto mechanic versus a Freudian base would look at it. The Freudian based therapist wants to know the nature, when it began, its source, and all that kind of stuff. Whereas a behavior based therapist says, well, let's figure out what it's doing and then we'll fix that. Okay. Sometimes using behavior therapy, there's just no reason to know what the cause is. If, for example, you have a phobia, someone has an irrational fear and they want to address it. They no longer want to be scared of flying. They no longer want to be scared of heights. They no longer want to be scared of snakes or something like that. Finding out the cause may not serve a purpose. Okay, where did you get your fear of flying? You saw a scary movie when you were a child and the plane crashed. Now you're fearful of flying. Great. Now we know. What difference does it make? Probably none. So with behavior therapy, we focus on changing the behavior. We don't always worry about the cause of the behavior. One type of behavior therapy is what is called systematic desensitization. Systematic desensitization. Some people will call this SD for short. SD, or systematic desensitization, is often used in the treatment of phobias. If you have someone who has a fear of heights, if you have someone who has, some other type of phobia and they truly want to overcome it, you might use this approach. Now, the technique involved is this. First of all, in talking with colleagues and people that I know that use this technique, they often want their clients to list their fears, put them on paper, make sure we know exactly what it is we're trying to treat. That is the idea. So that you don't want to start down a behavioral path and then find out you've been focusing on the wrong thing. Next thing you do is you learn some relaxation techniques, okay, how to breathe properly so as to relax oneself, how to tense the muscles and then let them relax as to take away the tension. There are other techniques to learn how to deal with your stress and lessen your anxiety. So you might spend days, if not a week or two, learning relaxation techniques before you ever take it to the next step. Now, once you've learned how to do that, this is where it begins. What you do, say in the treatment of a phobia via systematic desensitization, is that you expose a person to that which frightens them. You actually expose a person to that which frightens them, but you do it in very small dosages in the beginning. And as they get comfortable with that, you increase the exposure. So if I had an individual who had a fear of heights and being in high places, I might turn around and make sure that's the fear, learn some relaxation techniques, and then we might start in a high-rise building by going to, of all things, the second floor. You go to the second floor of the building and find a window and stare out the window and get used to being about, say, 20 feet off the ground, being on the second floor. And once they're comfortable being next to the window on the second floor and realizing that all is fine and all is safe, then you go up to the third floor. Okay, you increase the exposure. Take the stairs, the elevator, you go up to the next floor. Now you're on the third floor. Okay, and then once you've done that and you've increased the exposure there, then you go to the fourth floor and the next floor and so on and so forth. And that is the idea here. You increase the exposure slowly. There's also what is called flooding. And sometimes when it comes to the treatment of phobias, you're not able to slowly increase the exposure. If, for example, you have someone who suffers from aerophobia, a fear of flying, you can list their fears, you can learn the relaxation techniques, but there's no way to slowly increase exposure. You have to, in essence, get on the plane and go for a flight, okay? So it's very similar to SD in the first couple of steps. It's used for the treatment of phobias. You want to make sure you know exactly what it is you're treating. You learn to relax. But then exposure is immediate. In fact, some people call this exposure therapy, and where you find yourself exposed to that which frightens you. I've known cases of individuals who are fearful of elevators. And eventually you have to get on the elevator after learning all the relaxation techniques and just ride it. And what happens a lot of times with both flooding and systematic D, SD, is this. You learn to realize that your greatest fears are not going to come to pass. They are not going to happen. And once you realize that, it makes things a whole lot less stressful. You break the back of the phobia when you realize that you're not going to get trapped in the elevator and everything's fine and you're in a high rise and it's not going to fall over and stuff like that. I mean, seriously, those are some of the techniques that you learn. Okay. There's also behavior therapy that's based off of actually observing another person. We call this participant modeling. Let's say I have an individual who is frightened of snakes, and they are genuinely wanting to overcome their fear of snakes. They're tired of being scared of these kind of things. What they might do is undergo participant modeling. You might list their fears. You might learn some relaxation, but really the biggest thing is to observe. Okay, to observe. You might observe someone eventually, and you're told in advance what's going to happen, how they handle a snake. Okay, I have known of therapists who actually own a snake that is used in therapy. The same thing is true of children that have a fear of dogs, where a child can be brought in and they can observe as someone learns how to pet a dog, how to put their hand out so that the dog can figure out who they are and then pet them and so on. You can observe as someone else learns to observe, to hold a snake, how to handle it, and so on. What's interesting is first you have observation, okay, where you observe how other people are handling it and how things happen and don't. And then second, you get to imitate the behavior. And you might do this a little bit slowly. You might turn around and ask a child, okay, you've seen how the other person put out their hand. Now you put out your hand. All right. You might observe how someone holds a snake in both the front, near the neck, and in the back. And then they may ask you, why don't you turn around and hold the back of the snake? I'll hold the front of the snake. Start to realize they're not cold and clammy. They're actually warm and smooth. We're talking non-poisonous snakes. A friend of mine has done this with. And then eventually, if the snake starts to wrap itself around your arm a little bit to anchor itself, you just sort of take the tail and unravel it. And then eventually you're asked to, okay, now let's take it to the next step. You saw how I held it near the front of the snake. Now you do that. And then after a while, a person realizes, oh my gosh, I'm doing it. I'm holding a snake. I know what to do. I know how to respond. I see that it's not doing all the things I feared it would do. All is good. The next thing is what are called cognitive therapies. Now, with cognitive therapies, The premise and the idea is this: if you want to change someone's behavior, okay, sometimes you have to change how they think, because people can sometimes think irrationally, and that can and does happen. If you want to change someone's behavior, you want to change how they think. This is Dr. Albert Ellis. Dr. Ellis has come up with a technique called rational emotive behavior therapy. Rational emotive behavior therapy. The idea behind REBT is that to overcome unhealthy behavior, you have to change how one thinks, because people often think irrationally. All right. Another individual that's very much involved with this REBT is Aaron Beck. Aaron Beck, along with Albert Ellis, have looked at this from different realms. Dr. Beck actually studies rational emotive behavior therapy and applies it to depression. A lot of times, adults sometimes can actually think themselves into a depressive state through irrational thinking. Okay, and that can and does occur. For example, if you get someone who turns around and gets divorced, and they're in their 50s, and they think to themselves irrationally, I'll never find anyone to love. I'm old, no one will ever love me. And they can actually work themselves into a state of clinical depression. And that, unfortunately, can and does occur. So the idea here is to change how a person thinks so that they do not think irrationally. Let me give you some examples. Now, there's an awful lot of examples here, and I by no means expect you to write these down, but I want to give you examples of how sometimes people think irrationally, okay? I don't deserve something. I don't deserve positive attention from others. I don't deserve a boyfriend. I don't deserve a girlfriend. I don't deserve someone to love me. And there are people that actually sort of convince themselves of that. That's irrational, okay? That's a thought about themselves. Everything has to go right. Well, no, or it's a disaster. No, everything doesn't have to go right. Sometimes things don't go right. You could put together a big meal for someone, maybe their family, and maybe in the process of trying to put it together, your baking in the oven heating element burns out. Oh my God, it's a disaster. Well, no, it's not. It's not your fault. I mean, basically it happens. So you work around it. Okay. I have to find the perfect man, or I have to find the perfect woman. There is no such thing. Okay. So, you do that, you end up being very dissatisfied. No one cares about anyone else. Well, that's irrational. Okay. There are no such things as successful relationships. You're bound to get hurt in a relationship. So why try? I know people that believe that. Okay, you run the risk of getting hurt, so why try? Well, then they're depressed all the time. There's probably a loser in every fight, so let's not fight. Well, fights do not have to end that way. Sometimes we work to resolve, not to have a winner and loser. It's not who you are, but what you do that makes you attractive to another person. Not completely, no, by no means. All right, and on and on and on. A family that plays together stays together. Families can play together and still not stay together, or praise together and still not stay together. And you see more and stuff like that. Admitting to a mistake, admitting to a failure is a sign of weakness. So you stay miserable because you won't admit you made a mistake. All right. These are all the bad examples, or they're actually good examples of bad thinking, irrational thinking. Okay. This is a way of addressing rational emotive behavior therapy. And to understand this, you need to understand the ABCs of rational emotive behavior therapy. If you take a look at this, A stands for actions, or activating events. Okay? Activating events. Actions and activating events, a lot of times, are things you have no control over. In this particular example, okay, it says Harry's view. Harry asks Sally to a concert and gets turned down without even a reason. That's the action. That's the activating event. You have no control over that. Okay. C stands for consequence. What's the end result? Now, as Harry sees it, Harry asks Sally out to a concert. He gets turned down without a reason, okay? She doesn't want to go with him. So the consequence is that Harry is shocked, dejected, angry, and depressed. As Harry sees it, A causes C, okay? Actions cause consequence. Albert Ellis would tell you that you have to take something else into consideration, and that is B, the letter B, the belief about the event. Are you thinking irrational? Do you have irrational beliefs? Or do you have rational ones? Irrational or rational ones? Look at it from Albert Ellis's view. A does not cause C. The action occurs, activating events. Harry asks Sally to the concert. He gets turned down without a reason. Can't change that. If you think irrationally, it's terrible to get turned down. It's humiliating to get turned down. I can't stand getting turned down. If you think irrationally, yes, that causes emotional distress. Shocked, angry, dejected, depressed, okay? It's not the actions that directly cause a consequence. It's the irrational beliefs about the actions that cause the consequence. So once again, you can't change the action, but you can change your belief about the action or the activating event. So once again, Harry asks Sally. She turns him down without a reason. Now let's say Harry thinks about this rationally, okay? If she doesn't want to go out with me, fine. I'll take someone else. That's too bad, but that's life. Now that's thinking rationally. If he does that, if he thinks rationally, okay, take a look at the consequence. He's still annoyed, and he's still disappointed. But he's going to have fun at the concert anyway with someone else. And that is far better than shocked, angry, dejected, and depressed. Okay? So in that regard, you can do this in your life in many a way. Change how you think. Okay? Change how you think. If you change how you think and you think rationally about things, the consequence isn't so bad. Yes, you're going to have fights. Okay? It's not terrible to get into a fight. No, you will not find a perfect person. Once you accept the fact that whoever you find is going to have flaws, okay, you got a better chance of finding someone, all right? And on and on and on. Be aware of this. Albert Ellis, to make this work, a lot of times would meet with his clients once to twice a week. And he would practice REBT for 52 straight weeks. He believed that it took this amount of time and exposure to get someone to change how they think. Changing behavior, according to Albert Ellis, is easy. Changing how you think is quite the challenge. So that's why he would meet once or twice a week for 52 straight weeks with clients, and did so with rational motive behavior therapy. Additionally, Ellis and these cognitive therapists, they have to challenge you. They have to challenge your irrational thinking. Where Carl Rogers in the humanistic approach was always positive, Albert Ellis was more confrontational. And some people don't like that. It doesn't mean he yells and screams at his clients, but he challenges and confronts their irrational thinking. Why do you think that you have to be liked by everyone? You know? Why do you think it's so humiliating to get turned down? It's not. It happens. You know, I've met people that turn around and get upset that someone at their place of work is not nice to them. No matter how hard they try, they're not nice. And my answer has been, why do you think you have to be liked by everyone? I've had people say, well, I don't think I have to be liked by everyone. My response, then why are you so upset that this person doesn't like you? If they want to be a jerk, that's their loss. All right? But you can't change their actions. If they want to be that way, your thinking should not be, it's terrible that they hate me. It's terrible that I can't make them like me. Instead, be rational. Fine. If they don't want to be nice, so be it. All right? That's too bad. But that's life. All right. That's enough on the behavior and cognitive therapies for now. Hope that helps. Do take care.